Most people don't realize it, but there is a silent, almost invisible behavior that dominates a large part of modern human relationships. The compulsion to explain oneself all the time. It is a habit that seems harmless, even polite. After all, justifying your choices, your emotions, your absences, or mood changes can sound like empathy, like consideration for others. But behind this constant need to justify oneself lies something much deeper and more disturbing, a poorly healed psychological wound. Carl Gustav Jung, one of the greatest names in analytical psychology, identified this pattern as a clear symptom of disconnection from the self. The repeated attempt to convince others about who you are, what you feel, and why you act in a certain way actually reveals a state of self-neglect. The person who constantly explains themselves is often seeking something they never received, permission to exist. This behavior often arises in environments marked by emotional invalidation. These are contexts, often familial, where the child's subjective experience is systematically disqualified. You're exaggerating. There's no reason to feel that way. The internalized message is brutal. What I feel only has value if others understand, approve, or allow it. Over time, this belief transforms into an invisible prison, where the individual becomes dependent on others' understanding to affirm their own internal reality. When an adult compulsively explains themselves, they are unconsciously trying to avoid abandonment, judgment, or rejection. They believe that if others understand their reasons, perhaps they won't criticize them, won't distance themselves, won't reject them. It is a desperate attempt to control others' perception, to ensure belonging and emotional security. But this constant effort comes at a very high price: one's own psychological autonomy. By focusing on external validation, the individual begins to neglect their internal authority. They no longer act because they believe in something, but because they need to justify themselves to avoid being misunderstood. They no longer feel freely, but rationalize their emotions to avoid the discomfort of being viewed negatively. Gradually, they stop living for themselves and start acting for others, in an eternal theater, where the audience has more power than the protagonist. Jung understood this phenomenon as a central obstacle on the path to individuation, the process by which a human being truly becomes who they are. And the truth is harsh. As long as there is a constant need to explain oneself, there is no inner freedom, because compulsive explanation is a sophisticated form of submission. It is as if, with each justification, the individual says, "I can only exist if you allow it." When the individual begins to silence themselves in the face of the need to justify, the silence that arises is disconcerting because it reveals the emptiness left by the absence of a consolidated internal authority. For Carl Jung, true psychological freedom does not arise from social acceptance or external understanding. It emerges from the development of internal authority. Internal authority is the opposite of compulsive self-explanation, while the latter is anchored in insecurity and the need to justify every step to be accepted. Internal authority arises from the deep conviction that your truth does not need to be negotiated. This transition is not merely intellectual, it is existential. The center of gravity of the psyche shifts from the periphery of external approval back to the center of the self, where the totality of being resides. Silence, therefore, is not just the absence of words, it is the affirmation of being. It is the refusal to put your identity on trial. When someone stops justifying themselves compulsively, they are not only avoiding conflicts, they are deactivating an entire system of psychological control that fed on their insecurity. This type of silence is unsettling, because for those who have always expected you to bow, to explain yourself, to correct yourself, the absence of justification is interpreted as rebellion, and, in a sense, it is. Not an immature rebellion, but a silent revolution, an implicit declaration that you owe no explanations to be who you are. When you stop explaining yourself, you break the implicit pact of inferiority. You cease to position yourself as someone who needs to be accepted and begin to occupy the space of someone who already accepts themselves. Some people will distance themselves, but this is not a sign of error, but of realignment. Your silence begins to function as a filter, revealing who was by your side out of genuine affinity and who was only there because you were easy to control. An integrated person does not beg to be understood. They communicate, they express, but they do not convince, because they do not start from the premise that they need to justify their existence. Their words come from a solid center, not from a hidden lack. The world treats with more respect those who treat themselves with respect, and self-respect begins when you refuse to negotiate what is essential in you. The less you seek approval, the more respect you evoke, because integrity has weight, density, and presence. That is why, without saying a word, a centered person can alter the dynamics of an environment. When you stop justifying yourself, you start to emanate a new frequency. You no longer say, "Please understand me." You emanate, "I know who I am, and I don't need your permission," and the world inevitably responds.